I hope everybody had a good lunch and is ready to go for this afternoon. We have a very special afternoon lined up for you, and to start that afternoon off, it is my pleasure to introduce Eric Sigmund. Eric is the legal advisor for the International Humanitarian Law Dissemination at the American Red Cross headquarters in Washington, D.C. And as I mentioned earlier, the American Red Cross is also one of our sponsors for this year's dialogues. And so again, it is my pleasure to introduce Eric to take us into the next phase of our program.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. It is truly a pleasure to be here today at the 7th Annual International Humanitarian Law Dialogues. I'd like to first express my gratitude to the Robert H. Jackson Center for inviting me to be a part of this event again on the beautiful grounds of the Chautauqua Institution. You had a great set of opening sessions this morning, and I hope that we can continue that momentum through this afternoon, and we're going to shift gears a little bit. Instead of hearing from the prosecutors from the courts, now we're going to have a chance to hear from a young woman on the ground doing work in Afghanistan. Before lunch, too, we heard about some of the successes of the tribunals over the past year, and I wanted to quickly add two more newsworthy notes before I turn the program over to our speaker. This year is a historic year in the field of international humanitarian law. As you may know, 2013 marks the 150th anniversary of the establishment of the International Committee of the Red Cross, an international element of the Red Cross Red Crescent movement that works to alleviate the suffering of victims of armed conflict wherever they may be found. The ICRC is present in over 80 countries and works closely with key stakeholders on the ground to provide humanitarian assistance where it is needed and to strengthen the rule of law. It is also the 150th anniversary of the Lieber Code. The Lieber Code, a set of 157 rules regulating the conduct of soldiers on the battlefield during the American Civil War, was the first modern codification of rules governing the conduct of soldiers during conflict. The code, issued by President Abraham Lincoln through General Order No. 100 in 1863, provides the foundation for the rules and principles found in the Geneva Conventions and other international humanitarian law treaties today. It is very fitting, then, that on this anniversary year, the American Red Cross introduces Shabana Basij Rashik, a woman who is at the forefront of rights activism in Afghanistan and who represents the next generation of humanitarians that will continue to push forward humanitarian and human rights law into the 21st century for this Clara Barton lecture. Shabana will be Skyping in with us from Afghanistan today, taking time away from her brother's wedding ceremony to be with us this afternoon. Clara Barton, the founder of the American Red Cross, risked her life during the American Civil War and subsequent conflicts in Europe to provide medical care and humanitarian assistance to sick and wounded soldiers on the battlefield, her selfless work earning her the title Angel of the Battlefield. She also was the primary champion advocating for the United States ratification of the First Geneva Convention of 1864. Since the American Red Cross's founding, Clara Barton helped establish the organization as a global institution, providing relief services, life-saving aid, and family reunification services to those affected by natural disasters and armed conflict. The American Red Cross is also a leader in the public dissemination of international humanitarian law. Today, Barton is remembered as one of the most influential female figures of her time in this field. Shabana holds many of the same characteristics of Clara Barton. At only 23 years old, Shabana has already had a powerful impact on many in her home country, Afghanistan, and elsewhere around the world. Even as a child, she pushed the envelope on social norms, challenging the status quo, and risking her own life in pursuit of an education that few Afghan women could obtain, dressing up as a boy to attend a secret high school for girls in Afghanistan under the Taliban regime. She would eventually graduate from Mariam High School in Afghanistan and go on to Middlebury College, graduating magna cum laude in International Studies and Women and Gender Studies. She subsequently studied Arabic and Islamic law at Alexandria University in Egypt. A champion of equality and rights for women, Shabana works to empower Afghan women through education and advocacy, her work receiving international acclaim. During college, she founded HeLa, which means hope in Pashto, a nonprofit organization that offers educational opportunities and training for young women. Shabana is currently the managing director of SOLA, the School of Leadership Afghanistan, a nonprofit boarding school in Afghanistan, which helps young women access educational opportunities and bring skills back to their communities. She hopes to establish SOLA as an internationally accredited boarding school for women, and her efforts have already impacted many. She's been named one of Glamour magazine's top 10 college women of 2010, has been featured on CNN's Amanpour, recently served as a speaker alongside UN High Commissioner of Human Rights, Navi Pillay, and last night was awarded the Joshua Heinz Award for Humanitarian Achievement, a very prestigious honor. Last night at the Robert Jackson Center, we heard from Shabana, who shared some of her extraordinary vision, and I am confident that her achievements, while a major step forward for equality and peace in Afghanistan, will be only a single stitch in an enormous patchwork of projects and missions which will change the lives of countless individuals and cultivate unprecedented change and opportunities in Afghanistan. There is no question that the spirit of Clara Barton is alive and well today in this room. Shabana's strength, resilience, and vision are incredible, and it's with great admiration and excitement that I ask you to join me in welcoming Shabana for us to hear her story today.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Greetings to the 7th Annual Humanitarian Law Dialogues, to Professor Crane, Chief Prosecutor Bensouda, distinguished guests, and my friends at the Jackson Center, especially Andrew Biter, who's been extremely involved in our efforts in Afghanistan and also has involved his classroom always. Looking at the list of the previous winners of this award, I feel extremely humbled to be listed among them. And I wish I could be there in person, but my brother got married yesterday, and in Afghanistan, the celebrations go on for weeks. So we're still celebrating. And I'm still very honored to be able to speak with you and to have this opportunity to speak with you from here in Afghanistan via Skype. For me, looking at, I want to focus a little bit about how I got involved in the work I do today at SOLA through my personal story, but also how, for me, has been really the foundation of being so passionate about education in Afghanistan. I grew up under the Taliban regime from 1996 to 2001. My understanding of the world was extremely limited. We grew up under a regime that banned people from watching TV, from being connected with the world outside of us. Women were not allowed to go to work. Girls were not allowed to go to school. And I grew up basically in absolute isolation. Growing up, I didn't even know what the world outside of Afghanistan was like or could be like. I just had a vague understanding of Afghanistan going through a really horrible time, but places outside of Afghanistan are relatively much better. Today, the fact that I speak with you, I am one of the very few extremely privileged Afghan women. I don't mean that in an economic sense. I mean that in every other sense. I grew up in a family who valued education more than anything in our life. My parents are so committed to education. I have traveled a lot in this very young age, but I have not met anyone who are that as committed as my parents are to education. I believe the reason behind that is that both of them were first in their families to receive an education. My mom and her sisters were the first women in their families to be allowed to go to school. And because of that, my grandfather was disowned by his father for sending his daughters to school. And my father was the first man in his family to go to school. And when they faced that situation under Taliban, where they weren't allowed by the government to educate their daughters, it was extremely difficult for them. It was extremely difficult for them to even accept the fact that 4 of their daughters will grow up uneducated, not being able to even read or write. So they risked their lives, they risked our lives, and sent us to secret schools. And they were really underground schools, and what I mean by that is literally classrooms that were run in a teacher's living room. I attended, the first time I ever attended a school was going to a secret school. I had no previous experience of what a public school or a proper school could look like to have a comparison. For me, probably one of the most dangerous things growing up under Taliban, and I can think of that as for a generation of both girls and boys, and I think particularly boys who grew up thinking the life under Taliban as quote unquote normal. So I had an older sister who also had to attend a secret school. And because she was old enough, she was required by the Taliban to wear a burqa to cover herself when she was outside. And since she had to do that, she was also not allowed to be outside alone, unaccompanied. So she had to have a male escort. So I dressed as a boy to go with her to the school. That was the only way both of us could receive an education. But again, as I mentioned, that to me was a normal way of growing up. Every time I'm in New York City, I cannot help but to think about the fact that the first time I heard about the United States was 9/11. When a friend of mine came to my house and explained what she saw on TV when she was in Pakistan a few days ago, I could not believe her story. I thought she was making up a story, simply because I could not comprehend the fact that human beings had the capacity to build tall buildings like the Twin Towers. The reference that I had with that for that was the tallest building that I knew ever existed was in the middle of Kabul city, and it was only 18-story tall. And every time I passed by that, I just couldn't believe how the engineers and the workers that built it. The first question I asked that friend was, how many days does it take to go from the first floor to the top floor? I had no reference for elevators and all of that. Are there restaurants on the way? Are there bathrooms? Is there a huge line outside these buildings so that people can go to the top and see the world? So basically, it took me a long time to comprehend the fact that thousands of people died that day. And then it was so strange to me to then somehow hear the conversations at that young age of how we Afghans were to blame for what happened. I just couldn't make the connection. How could have we done that if I didn't even know that such buildings could exist? I was extremely lucky to have an opportunity to come to the U.S. as a high school exchange student. In 2005, I ended up in Wisconsin for a year, where I gained 40 pounds. um, Hello? Good. Apologies for that. Well, Wisconsin, other than being absolutely amazed by the food, what was and snacking, because we Afghans do not snack. We only eat 3 times a day. What was so beautiful was the fact that I had, at a very young age, an opportunity to to get outside of my comfort zone, to also look at my own country from an outsider's perspective, to hear what people thought about us and about my country. And also because I was, for many people, the first Afghan they had ever met, I was faced with so many questions that I often didn't think of answering even to myself. So it really compelled me to learn a lot more about Afghanistan so that I could answer people's questions, to learn more about Islam so that I could answer all the questions that people had in connect, especially about Islam and also terrorism. And my challenge to really explain how that was not part of what I thought of my religion. Um, but also, as I learned more about Afghanistan there, I grew more aware of um, the problems in my country. Growing up, I definitely knew that we had so many problems in Afghanistan. Yes, the educational system is not working. Yes, we don't even have, a lot of people don't even have access to the most basic healthcare. And I knew a lot of these, but I had never taken the time to absorb and to really understand what it meant. I knew that illiteracy rate for women in Afghanistan was one of the highest until I read that more than 90% of women in Afghanistan don't even aren't even able to read or write, or will never have an opportunity to. And comparing that with the life of people in Wisconsin around me, it was a lot to understand. Well, to make all of that story short, I went back to Afghanistan at the end of at the end of my academic year, so middle of 2006. Spent a year in Afghanistan where I built a school in my father's village. But when I came back to the U.S. to attend undergraduate school at Middlebury College, there again I was yet surrounded again with this sense of why me? The fact that I was attending Middlebury, or the fact that I would graduate from a college or have an undergraduate degree will put me into less than 6% of Afghan women lucky enough to go to university. And the fact that I was able to study abroad in a place like Middlebury, where even less than 2% of Americans have access to such education, I always kept thinking, why me? How did I deserve this opportunity? And then what next? What is it that I can do with this education? Interestingly enough, I always thought of going to law school after finishing my undergraduate degree. And especially, I focused my senior thesis at Middlebury on safe houses or shelters in Afghanistan, given the fact that that's a very recent. It didn't even exist until 2004. The fact that women would have a response to domestic violence and abuse, or any form or type of abuse and violence, other than just bearing the fact that, yes, as a woman, violated against. So that really intrigued me, and I focused my thesis on that, and interviewed a lot of women who were staying in shelters. And what I mean by shelters, they're also very, very secret in Afghanistan, because a lot of these women are shaming families for really running away from the family, or for responding to violence in such way. And in combination with all of this happening, it really one day hit me that for any form of violence in Afghanistan to reduce, for the many, many problems that Afghans have faced today, whether it's lack of proper healthcare, whether it's lack of engineers in Afghanistan, whether it's lack of proper leaders to really take us out of this problem in Afghanistan. It all came down to education for me. Thinking, well, how could Afghanistan prosper if we we as Afghans cannot come up with solutions to Afghanistan's problems. And especially because of the fact that our educational system does not prepare us to be leaders. And what I mean by that is our educational system is based on rote memorization. Every single child goes to the children who go to school, they spend no more than 3 hours in a given day in a school. They only learn to memorize. What is written in a textbook is taken as fact. It's never questioned. And so thinking about all of this, how can you expect leaders to emerge from that? The fact that Afghanistan has gone through 30 years of war, and this may sound strange to many of you sitting in the audience today, it is a land of opportunity. It's a dreamland for entrepreneurs, simply because there is so much need. There's so much that can be done in Afghanistan. And when you think about that entrepreneurship and that entrepreneurial drive, you think immediately about creativity and critical thinking and analytical thinking. That is simply discouraged and killed starting at elementary school in Afghanistan. The why this and I have a question is never encouraged, or it's often even punished because it's taken by the teachers as if the student is questioning his or her ability, which is very unfortunate. So when I was in college, that's why I started SOLA, the School of Leadership Afghanistan. It's very small, but I believe that unless we change the educational system in Afghanistan, give young people the opportunity that they deserve, especially now, we cannot expect change, neither in our healthcare, neither in our legal system, or any of that. It came down to the fact that why do I think differently? Why do I do what I do? And it all came down to the fact that someone along in my life, in the form of my parents, my family, my school, my teachers, my professors, paid attention to me and to my education. And if that can happen to lots of the young generation, things will change. A lot of people, I understand that if you are interested in Afghanistan and what's happening, based on what you read, you might have a very hopeless picture of the country. You might also, and when I say you, I mean as you Americans might also think that it's a lost cause, and every penny went into the fact that it went to Afghanistan is a waste of the money. But as a young Afghan woman, and especially as someone who grew up under the most terrible government in the history of Afghanistan, I can at least try to tell you that that's not the whole picture. And Afghanistan is a very complicated country. What is happening here is extremely complicated. And yet, amidst all of this, I see a lot of hope. I see through the students who attend our school. I see it in the changes that you never get to hear about, but we see here in Afghanistan. A few years ago, in fact, just 3 years ago, I could not have had this conversation with you at this hour in Afghanistan because we wouldn't have electricity. But I can right now because we do have city power. And so that may seem as a very small change, but it's huge. The first time I ever experienced a 24-hour and no outage ever in electricity in Afghanistan was when I was 20. I was literally waiting for the power to go off, and it was strange to have it on still. Until my youngest brother, who's my only post-Taliban sibling, reminded me that we no longer live in the Taliban era. And that's true. Changes are very slow in Afghanistan, but they are happening. Let me give you a few examples of the students at SOLA in our school. And before I do that, I will explain shortly what we do at SOLA. It's a very small school. I started with an American in 2008 with 4 students, and today we have 25 students in Kabul, and we have helped 36 students from 15 different provinces secure scholarships into 34 different educational institutions in 5 different countries. And all of those scholarships amounting to $6.2 million. How we do what we do is simply we have a dormitory in Kabul for young girls, which is extremely radical in the Afghan sense that lots of people will not want their young daughters to live away from the families just to receive an education. And we have our students coming from 16 different provinces to us. In Afghanistan, I think more than Taliban being a problem in Afghanistan, our biggest challenge is ethnic tension. The fact that we, as a country, because we have so many different ethnic groups, cannot get along, and it's only a recent problem. It's a product of the 30 years of war, the civil war especially, and yet our students coming from 16 different provinces, they're encouraged to live together in a very small community at SOLA. They take a pledge to accept, respect, appreciate, and promote the different qualities that every single person brings to the SOLA community. And because we cannot choose one ethnic group's language over the other, they also sign a language pledge to speak English only. It also helps the fact that we are preparing them to take advantage of educational opportunities outside of Afghanistan, where critical thinking and creativity is encouraged. And we're also simultaneously working for a lot of people that may sound like, hello? 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 Hey, my apologies. We're still working on our internet speed here in Afghanistan. So I'll not speak for very long. I will leave more time for Q&A, but just to finish the thought about SOLA, the students who attend SOLA, various provinces. And for me, where I get my inspiration and my commitment to education comes from these young girls who travel miles and miles to come to Kabul so that they can receive a better education at our school. And what is so fascinating about them to me is that they have very supportive parents. I will give you one specific example from Helmand province in southern Afghanistan. We had a student, I admitted that student in 2011 over the phone. Her admission interview was over the phone because she could not access internet or she could not fill out an application. When she came to SOLA, she spoke only 2 words of English before she signed the language pledge. Good morning. And after she signed the pledge, I would see her at lunchtime and she would say good morning. And before I went home in the evening, she would say good morning with a big smile. That girl, within a year, learned English and a language that was spoken in Kabul, but not in her native province. And she is so committed to her education because her father has taken risks back home. for her. 6 months ago, she was on a holiday break, going back home, and her father picked her up from the provincial center. Then they were driving to their local to their rural village, and as they were driving, they missed being killed by a roadside bomb by minutes. And they assumed on the way that it was set for someone else, but they just happened to go across that street. And when he got home, he received a phone call, and the person saying, "How come you're still alive? I was planning your funeral for the holiday. If you send your daughter back to school, we will try again." And this father said, "You can kill me now if you wish, but I will not stop my daughter's future because of your backward ideas." And he continued to say, if it's in my fate to die in your hands, so be it. Go ahead and try. But my daughter is going back to Kabul. Well, she not only returned back to Kabul, this summer, I accompanied 9 Solar students to the U.S., where they each had received full scholarship to attend various schools, and she was among them. And she's attending a boarding school in Massachusetts for 4 years this fall. And when her father was saying goodbye to her at the airport in Kabul in June, he reminded her and said, "Listen, don't forget that you're not doing this just for yourself. You're doing this for the thousands of girls, especially in your province and in your village, who will never have this opportunity. So study hard and don't forget those women." And to me, that is a sign of great hope. The fact that a man, if I were to show his picture to, please excuse me, but if I show his picture to a typical American, they would immediately say a Talib. Long beard, turban on his head, but is a fierce advocate for education. And that kind of men, in the form of fathers and brothers, and mothers too, make my work possible. We keep very low profile because our school can be easily seen as a threat. We educate girls in this house, and there are American teachers who come all the way from the U.S. to teach them, and they are able to speak English and so on. All of these are observations from the outside. But what keeps us protected is these committed parents that live all over Afghanistan. So for me, that is the image of Afghanistan that I would like to convey to you, that there is so much hope, and there are parents who literally risk their lives to this date to send their daughters to school. And we need such work so desperately. Our percentage of educated women is absolutely shockingly low. Until and unless that changes, we cannot see any progress in Afghanistan. I've always wanted to be either a doctor or at one point a lawyer, and then engineer. All of these desires were driven by the fact that I would see so much need. While I was building that school in my father's village, the kind of roads that I traveled unpaved, and I've always wanted to see, well, what if I can learn to become an engineer and help build these roads. When I was working at the shelter, working on my thesis, I was so desperately, so urgently wanted to become a lawyer so that I can help defend these cases of women who were brutally abused. And I always wanted to become a doctor, simply knowing the fact that if a family member would be diagnosed with cancer today, they would just have to wait to die in Afghanistan because simply there's no treatment. But the reason I chose education, or to become an educator, is because all of these students who I help, all of these young girls, really smart, bright, committed, and driven girls who want to receive an education, then they can go on to become the doctors, the engineers, and the lawyers that Afghanistan really urgently needs today. And that's why my work seems like an absolute pleasure to me every single day, to the point where I can easily work until, and especially after 10 o'clock at night every day. And that's not good for me, because for me it's always family, education, and then work. I always try to remind myself. But SOLA to me is not work. It is absolutely the kind of work that my family supports me in doing. And it is so rewarding to me. And I feel very privileged yet one more time to have found my passion at such a young age. I'll thank you very much for listening. I'll end my remarks here, but let you ask questions and then shed more light on a certain part of what you're interested in hearing more about. Thank you very much again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Shabana. Can you hear me, by the way?
I'm sorry, I have a little trouble hearing you. I couldn't hear you earlier either.
Shabana, we're going to move into
Okay,
questions
much
here.
better.
And if anyone has a question, please ask that you come down to where I'm sitting right here and talk directly in the microphone. Shabana, if that works for you, we're in a good spot.
Yes, I can hear you much better. Thanks.
Great. Well, I'll start off here. I've had the pleasure of hearing you a few times, and I'm always struck by your proficiency in English and impressed by it. Tell us about the challenge that your father gave you as far as language goes, and what your dad means to you.
Well, let me tell you that my father's in the army, and growing up, I always felt like a little soldier in front of him, or I always pretended to be one. He speaks 4 languages, and casually he would always remind us that if his children also only spoke 4 languages, it would be a real shame. Hello?
Hey, we can hear you.
I'm not sure how much of what I said you heard, but just saying that my parents, both of them, have always emphasized learning languages. They're both very well educated, very well respected in Afghanistan, but because they cannot speak English, they always remind us that if they were to travel outside of Afghanistan, they would be considered illiterate because they won't be able to read or communicate with people. My mom would always say, we speak 1 language, we're 1 person. We speak 2 languages, we're 2 persons. And if we speak more, we're able to think in multiple ways and through multiple cultures and ways of life. And that is very enriching. So I grew up always hearing that, and it was a combination of that and my mom who's an educator, and my dad who's a military person. We were never given the option of, do you want to learn French or English? We were told that we were going to learn English at a very young age. So we did. And it's been very, very helpful for all of us.
Hi, Shabana. I'm Kayla. I just want to say
Hello.
hi. I just want to say you're amazing and you're like the perfect example of what a leader is. And I was wondering if you ever thought
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I was wondering if you ever thought of possibly being the president someday of Afghanistan. Because I think you'd be an amazing president.
Thank you, Kayla. Let's see if President Carter is going to step down so that someone else can take over. Well, I've been told that before, and I take it both as a compliment, but I also don't. I will tell you why. First, from you, I absolutely take it as a compliment, and thank you. And the second is that I've realized that outside of Afghanistan, the image of what an Afghan woman or man can be like is the expectations at least so low because of these years and years of horror, and the images that you see on TV is nothing but absolute desperate lives. That when any Afghan student that I know who've studied abroad has been at one point or not told that they could be the president of Afghanistan. So I always tell my students that if you're told that, don't let that boost your ego. Just take it as a nice compliment and work with that. And I think for me, wanting to become a president or not, I think for me it's not a question of working up to work towards achieving a position. For me, wherever I see myself most helpful, that's what I plan to do in life. When I graduated from Millbury College, 2011 back then was considered a decisive year for Afghanistan, and that things would go very wrong. Just like right now, 2014 is discussed. And except my family, everybody else was encouraging me to stay in the U.S. And to just make a life there for myself, and not take the risks that I've been taking before. But when I decided to come back to Afghanistan, which was a decision that I had long before made, I was called. A lot of people didn't understand and the reasoning behind why I would leave a job in the U.S., an offer that someone had made to go and back to Afghanistan. And for me, the response was that if I were to take that job in the U.S., there were thousands of qualified and perhaps even more qualified people who could fill that position. But if I were to come back to Afghanistan, there are very few people who could do what I could for Afghanistan, simply because of the skills that I had gained in the U.S., the education that I had received, and the fact that I could share that. For me, my parents had taught me that before in their own ways. The fact that education and giving back was always one thing. It always went hand in hand for me. But for me, in my American education, Emerson taught me that, who describes the greatest sin in the world to be the fact that you know and you have knowledge and you don't share that with others. And for me to read those words in my freshman year seminar was really profound. So coming back to Afghanistan to me was, and especially then the questions that I would get, and you went to a very good college only to then open a school and become an educator, with a question mark, and to which I very proudly say, yes, that's exactly what I did and do. And that's because I know that that's what we need the most in Afghanistan. If I can be effective in a certain position, I will definitely do that. But if it's just merely for the sake of writing it down in my resume or having it in my background, I will not. So, but I don't know if becoming a president is one of those for me. Time will tell. Thank you for the question, though. And Drew, by the way, I can no longer see the video.
I'm sorry, we couldn't hear that last line. She can't see. Oh, she can't see the video. Okay.
Um,
There we go. Shabana, unfortunately, our time is at a close here. What I'm going to do is minimize the screen for a moment and put on the SOLA website. How can people in the audience help? I know for starters, your internet connection costs an astounding, if I got this right, $7,000 a month. Tell us more about...
It's $2,000 a month.
2,000, excuse me.
2,000 US dollars.
It's a big difference, but
yes.
still...
It's absolutely shocking.
Yeah,
Yes, I
so
know.
it's $2,000 a month? And
Yes.
tell us more about how we in the audience can help, and talk about the mentorship role that people overseas play to
Yes.
your girls and things like that.
Well, as you mentioned, financial contributions are always one way that people can help, but for me, more than that, there are so many other ways that people can help that are most important to me. Please remember that we're right now in the process turning our program into an internationally accredited boarding school in Afghanistan. President Karzai, who saw my interview with CNN, Krishana Manpur on CNN, has promised 100 acres land for SOLA in Kabul, and it's still a promise, but I'm in the process of trying to get SOLA that land. Every single student at SOLA is paired with a mentor, Skype mentor, and we have majority of those mentors come from the U.S. Who have various different professions, but for them to sign up as a mentor is that commitment to Skype with our student at least once a week, or ideally 1 hour every day, and our mentors do anything, either those two options or anything in between, to teach our students English, but also have that, it's more of a conversation or a mentoring, basically cheering them from very far that yes, you can do it. Imagine that student from Helmand who went through that terrible, bomb blast with her father, and who was pretty shocked coming back to SOLA. It was Skyping with her mentor that really, helped every day. Yes, you can do this. Go girl, that kind of spirit. But they also learn, they discuss New York Times articles and so on. We also are right now accepting visiting volunteer teachers. This summer we had 3 teachers, one a PhD candidate at Chicago University, third year Harvard law student, and a junior at Harvard. They come from various backgrounds. We have in real need of teachers coming this fall to teach at SOLA. Recently, they've been able to hire a Director of Academic Affairs and Student Life. We're organizing more and more, but we definitely need more teachers to come to Afghanistan to. We also are looking for more ways of connecting with more boarding schools that you may know of. As the plan is to send our students, after preparing them for 2 years at SOLA, to boarding schools where hopefully they can receive full scholarships. And we look for host families, especially when our students are abroad. And just please spread the word about SOLA, and most importantly, remind your peers, and I know this may not be an easy sell, that Afghanistan is not a lost cause. And there is hope in Afghanistan, and I'm one small example of what young people are trying to achieve in Afghanistan. There's a woman my age who is heading a technology company. There are female designers and carpenters, and I mean, I'm just giving you different examples of who the young people, the young face of Afghanistan are, and that to me is a representative of a lot of hope. And please get in touch with us, and Drew can help you connect with me by email or refer you to our website and our Facebook page if you are on Facebook.
Well, Shabana, again, thank you for that and for your time and for your presence in the world. On behalf of Professor Crane, all the prosecutors, the Jackson Center, and the audience, thank you for your time with us today, and best wishes for your future.
Thank you all. Thank you. again, I do want to say that I'm very sad I couldn't be there in person, and thank you for accepting my time with you via Skype. I know it's not the same as being there in person, but I really appreciate your attention, and hopefully we can be in touch somehow.
Can't wait.
Thank you, Drew.
Thanks so much again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I can say that that is truly an incredible young woman, and it does not matter how much we try to relate to her experiences, or how much we think we may understand, or how much we think we may be relating to her experience. We truly are not. With what we've had, unless you've lived it, you cannot relate to it. Now, maybe except for one aspect. When she talked about actually waiting for the power to go off because you're so surprised the power was on, believe me, after 10 years in Sierra Leone, I could relate to that experience. We're going to take a very, very short break as we set up for the next panel. So please stretch if you need to. You know where the restrooms are, but please try to be back in 10 minutes so that we can move right into the next panel because we want to have plenty of time for it. Thank you very much.